The slap was so loud it cut through the soft clinking of crystal and the low murmur of conversation like a gunshot. For a split second, the entire harbor room seemed to freeze. Forks suspended midair, wine glasses hovering inches from parted lips, breaths caught halfway in. Then silence fell, heavy and stunned, pressing down on every table in the elegant waterfront restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. A black woman sat perfectly still at the center of it all. Her name was Maya Jefferson, and the red mark blooming across her cheek was already beginning to throb. Moments earlier, the evening had been unremarkable in the way luxury often is. Expensive, hushed, self-satisfied. Candlelight reflected off polished wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed the dark water beyond, dotted with the slow glow of passing boats. This was the kind of place where reservations were secured weeks in advance, where servers moved with practiced restraint, and where everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except, apparently, Maya. She had been sitting alone at a small table near the window, hands folded loosely around a glass of water, waiting for her fiancé to return from a phone call he'd promised would take no more than a minute or two. Waiting, too, for the quiet knot of unease she always felt in rooms like this to loosen. She wore a simple, dark dress, understated and comfortable, chosen without irony or apology. She wasn't trying to blend in. She wasn't trying to stand out. She was just there. That, it seemed, was the problem. The woman who struck her, Vivian Sterling, still stood over the table, her hands slowly lowering from where it had hovered in the air after impact. She was impeccably dressed, her posture rigid with a confidence that came from years of never being questioned. Her face was flushed, not with shame, but with the righteous fury of someone unaccustomed to being told no. "I will not be spoken to like that," Vivian said sharply, her voice carrying far too well in the stunned quiet. "I was only trying to correct a mistake." Maya said nothing. She didn't cry out. She didn't recoil. She simply lifted one hand and touched her cheek, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the pain beneath her composure. The sting was sharp, but the humiliation burned hotter. The weight of dozens of eyes, the unspoken judgments already forming in the silence. Someone near the bar gasped. Somewhere else, a chair scraped softly against the floor. A server took an instinctive step forward, then hesitated. This was how it happened, Maya realized. Not always with shouting or chaos, but with hesitation. With people unsure whether to intervene. With the unspoken calculation of power and appearance. Vivian drew herself up, mistaking the room's shock for agreement. "You can't just sit wherever you want," she continued, her tone cool now, clipped. "This is a private dining area. There are standards." Maya's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but steady. "I was waiting for the manager," she said, "and for my fiancé. Please step away from my table." The words were calm, polite, measured. They were also unforgivable. Vivian's lips tightened. For a heartbeat, it looked as though she might say something else, something cutting, something dismissive. Instead, she'd raised her hand, and now the damage was done. Phones began to appear, subtly at first, then more openly. Screens glowed in the low light as people realized they were witnessing something that would not stay contained within these walls. A moment that would travel, a moment that would demand a side. Behind Vivian, footsteps sounded, firm, unhurried. A man's voice cut through the silence, calm but edged with something unmistakable. "Did you just hit her?" Vivian turned, already preparing her defense, her assumptions lining up neatly in her mind. But the man wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Maya, his expression changing as his eyes met the mark on her face. "Did you just hit my fiancé?" he repeated. "If this story already has your attention, if moments like this make your stomach tighten and your pulse quicken, take a second to stay with us. Like this story, follow the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what would you have done if you were in that room? Stories like this only reach the people who need them when you help pass them along." Back in the harbor room, No one moved. No one spoke. The water beyond the windows kept rolling, indifferent and dark, as the meaning of that single word, fiancé, began to ripple outward. Because in that instant, Vivian Sterling had no idea that the woman she just slapped wasn't powerless. And she was about to learn how loud the consequences could be. Maya Jefferson had learned long ago that rooms like the harbor room were not built with her in mind. She didn't mean that in a self-pitying way. It was simply an observation, the kind you arrive at after years of moving through spaces where the air subtly shifts when you enter, where conversations pause just a fraction too long, where curiosity wears the mask of entitlement. She had learned to recognize the feeling early, long before the degrees, the awards, the invitations printed on thick ivory cardstock. That afternoon, hours before the slap, in the silence and the watching eyes, Maya had stood in front of the mirror of her hotel room, studying her reflection with calm scrutiny. Not judgment, never that, but intention. She chose the dress the same way she chose most things in her life, deliberately. Dark, simple, unadorned, comfortable enough to breathe in, professional enough to disappear into if she needed to. She didn't dress to disarm people, and she didn't dress to provoke them either. She dressed for herself. At 32, Maya was already a leading voice in her field, a public health data scientist whose work tracked invisible patterns that decided who lived comfortably and who struggled quietly. Maternal mortality, food deserts, environmental exposure, numbers that told stories most people preferred not to hear, translated into policies that forced attention anyway. She had grown up on the south side of Chicago, the daughter of a bus driver and a home health aide who taught her, without ever saying it outright, that survival required awareness and dignity required restraint. When money was tight, and it often was, her mother would still insist on two things: finish your homework and never let anyone make you feel small. Maya carried those lessons with her through college, through graduate school, through the nights she spent cleaning data sets while her friends slept. She learned how to make herself undeniable without becoming loud, how to occupy space without apology. She learned that excellence was not a shield, but it was leverage. Seattle was supposed to be different. That was what she'd told herself when she accepted the invitation to present her latest research to a closed-door philanthropic council. People with the power to fund projects that could change entire neighborhoods. Tomorrow mattered. Tonight was meant to be a pause before the weight of expectations settled in. Dinner was supposed to be simple. A quiet table, good food, water between her and the window, the harbor lights reflecting softly like a promise of calm. Ethan had insisted on it. "You don't celebrate enough," he'd said earlier that day, leaning against the doorframe of her hotel room, arms crossed, that familiar half-smile on his face. "You save the world, and then act like it's just another Tuesday." She'd laughed at that. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was his way of reminding her to breathe. Ethan Reed loved her in a way that was expansive and unguarded, and sometimes, if she was honest, a little frightening. Loving a man like Ethan meant loving someone whose presence bent rooms without effort. A white American man with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance, but from long-standing access. He moved through the world as if it expected him, and usually it did. They balanced each other that way, his certainty, her precision. Still, when they arrived at the restaurant, Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, anticipation. The quiet readiness that came from knowing you might need to defend your right to simply exist as you are. When Ethan was called away to take the phone call, his voice apologetic, his hand warm on her shoulder, Maya nodded and told him to go. She didn't want him to rush. She didn't want to be managed or protected from a world she already knew too well. She sat alone, hands folded, eyes drifting toward the water beyond the glass. She had no idea that in another part of the room, someone else had already noticed her. Not for who she was, but for who they assumed she wasn't. And as the minutes passed, and the quiet stretched just a little too long, the storm began to gather. Slowly, invisibly, right at her table. Ethan Reed had built his life around anticipation. In his world, waiting until something broke was a luxury no one could afford. Threats didn't announce themselves. They moved quietly, hiding inside ordinary moments until damage was already done. That instinct, the need to see what others missed, had made him one of the most sought-after minds in cybersecurity. The architect behind systems that protected hospitals, power grids, and entire cities from collapse. It had also made him dangerous to love. That afternoon, standing in the quiet of Maya's hotel room while she adjusted the clasp of her necklace, Ethan watched her the way he always did when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Not with possession, but with awe. She carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was, and he admired that more than any resume or title. It was the reason he'd fallen for her, the reason he trusted her judgment, even when the rest of the world tried to second-guess it. Still, he hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to wear the blue jacket?" he asked gently, keeping his voice light, careful not to turn concern into command. "It's not about fitting in, places like this attract people who look for excuses." Maya met his eyes in the mirror. There was no anger there, just understanding, tinged with something quieter and more complicated. "I know," she said, "but I don't want to spend my life dressing to disarm strangers." Ethan nodded, even as the familiar tension settled behind his ribs. He hated that she was right. He hated even more that being right didn't make her safe. Power, he learned, wasn't loud. It was subtle. It showed up in who got believed, who got protected, who got the benefit of the doubt before a word was spoken. Ethan carried that power with him whether he wanted to or not. Doors opened. Conversations softened. Mistakes were forgiven before they were even named. Maya didn't have that luxury. He told himself he wasn't trying to change her, only to shield her from the kinds of people he'd spent his life watching from a distance. People who mistook comfort for entitlement. People who thought the world came with instructions written just for them. When they arrived at the harbor room, Ethan felt the shift immediately. The subtle recalibration of attention. The way servers straightened just a little faster when he spoke. The way glances skimmed past Maya before returning to him, curious, assessing. It bothered him more than he let on. Dinner had barely begun when his phone vibrated, a coded alert from his security lead. Ethan's expression changed at once. He scanned the room without moving his head, instincts sharpening. "I need to take this," he murmured to Maya, leaning in close. "I'll be right back. I promise." She smiled, warm and unbothered, and waved him off. "Go, I'll be here." He hated leaving her alone. The feeling was irrational. She was more than capable of handling herself, but unease rarely obeyed logic. Still, the call couldn't wait. He stepped toward the quieter corridor near the bar, lowering his voice as he listened. The alert was serious but contained, a potential breach. Nothing immediate, nothing that should have taken more than a few minutes. And yet, as Ethan spoke in measured tones, solving problems he was trained to anticipate, he felt something else pressing at the edges of his awareness. A familiar, unwelcome thought. What if I'm wrong? What if my idea of protection is just another kind of pressure? He ended the call sooner than he should have and turned back toward the dining room. That was when he saw it, the way people were standing, the way no one was speaking, the way Maya's posture had changed, still composed but rigid, like a line pulled too tight. Ethan's heart dropped before his mind caught up. Power had taught him how to prevent disasters. Love was about to teach him what happened when you didn't see one coming soon enough. Vivian Sterling noticed Maya Jefferson the moment she sat down, not because Maya was loud or disruptive or out of place in any obvious way, but because she was quiet in a way that refused to perform. Vivian had spent decades learning how to read rooms like the harbor room, how to catalog who belonged and who didn't with a glance. It was a skill sharpened in board luncheons and charity galas, in spaces where politeness was currency and cruelty was delivered with a smile. Maya unsettled her. From across the room, Vivian watched the black woman sit alone by the window, hands folded, gaze turned toward the harbor lights, as if she had every right to be there. No nervous fidgeting, no deferential scanning of the room, just stillness, confidence without display. Vivian felt the first flicker of irritation then, sharp and inexplicable. The kind that rises when an unspoken rule is broken, even if no one can quite name it. She leaned toward her dining companion and murmured something dismissive, her eyes never leaving Maya. A server passed by. Vivian hesitated, then waved him away. This was not a staff issue. This was a correction that required her personal attention. When she rose from her chair, she did so slowly, deliberately, every movement rehearsed by years of command. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she approached Maya's table, stopping just close enough to invade space without technically crossing a line. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice warm, almost kind. "I think there's been some confusion." Maya looked up. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. "Yes?" Maya replied, her tone neutral, open, unguarded. Vivian smiled wider. "I couldn't help noticing you're sitting alone. This section is typically reserved for private reservations. I thought you might be lost." The words were gentle, reasonable. They were also precise, honed to cut without leaving visible marks. "I'm not lost," Maya said calmly. "I'm waiting for someone." Vivian's eyes flicked briefly to the empty chair across from Maya, then back again. "Of course you are, but we do try to maintain a certain atmosphere here. Perhaps you should check with the host stand." Maya felt it then, the shift. The moment politeness revealed its teeth. "I have a reservation," she said, her voice steady, "and I've asked for the manager." For the first time, Vivian's smile tightened. Not enough to be obvious, just enough. "Sweetheart," she said softly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "This isn't about making a scene. It's about understanding how places like this work." Around them, conversations ebbed. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to create a pocket of awareness. A server slowed as he passed. Someone at a nearby table leaned back, curious. Maya straightened slightly in her chair. "I understand exactly how this works," she said. "You're asking me to justify my presence. I'm declining." The word declined landed heavier than raised voices ever could have. Vivian felt heat rise in her chest. This was not how this was supposed to go. People like Maya were meant to apologize, to shrink, to move along quietly so the evening could continue uninterrupted. Instead, she was being challenged, calmly, publicly. "Let's not be dramatic," Vivian said, her voice cooling. "I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment." Maya's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not embarrassed," she replied, "but you're making me uncomfortable. Please step away from my table." Something in the air shifted. Politeness cracked. Vivian's gaze hardened, the veneer slipping just enough for the truth beneath to show. She leaned in closer, her perfume sharp, invasive. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she said quietly. "Not here." Maya inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She could feel eyes on her now, feel the weight of expectation, the unspoken demand that she resolve this in a way that made everyone else comfortable. Instead, she said, "I'm asking you to respect my space." For a heartbeat, Vivian simply stared at her. Then her hand moved, not in anger, not in frenzy, but with the controlled certainty of someone who had never been stopped before. And in that instant, polite violence revealed itself for what it was. Not a misunderstanding, a decision. The harbor room prided itself on serenity. That was the promise whispered into every detail. The dimmed chandeliers, the velvet hush of footsteps on polished wood, the careful spacing between tables so conversations could remain private, even in a full dining room. It was a place designed to make money feel like manners, to make exclusivity look like elegance. But elegance had a flaw Maya Jefferson had seen before. It depended on everyone agreeing to ignore what made them uncomfortable. After Vivian's hand came down, after the sudden shock of skin on skin, and the bright, immediate sting that flashed across Maya's cheek, The room did what privileged rooms often did in moments like this. It hesitated. It assessed. It waited for someone else to decide what reality would be. A server rushed forward, then stopped as if an invisible leash had snapped tight. Two other staff members hovered several paces away, eyes wide, faces strained with the terrible uncertainty of people who knew they were watching a crime, but feared treating the wrong person like the wrong person. Vivian lowered her hands slowly, breathing hard through flared nostrils. She looked around as if daring anyone to disagree with her version of events before she even said it out loud. Maya stayed seated. That alone was an act of defiance. Her cheek burned. Her pulse hammered in her throat. There was copper on her tongue where her teeth had caught the inside of her lip. And yet she did not leap up, did not shove a chair back, did not raise her voice. She knew what the room wanted from her, a reaction that could be used against her, a soundbite, a single moment that could be edited into a story where the victim became the threat. So she made herself precise. She turned her head slightly toward a nearby table where a middle-aged couple had been watching with alarm, and she said, clearly, audibly, "Would you be willing to stay until the manager arrives? I may need a witness." The woman's hand flew to her mouth. The man nodded once, sharply, as if relieved to be given something decent to do. Then Maya took out her phone, not to post, not to perform, but to document. She opened the recording app and placed it on the table face down, the small glowing dot of audio capture hidden beneath her palm. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Oh, so now you're threatening me," she snapped. "I'm protecting myself," Maya replied. She spoke slowly, each word measured. "Do not touch me again. I am requesting the general manager and security, and I'm calling the police." That last sentence shifted the air. Calling the police was a line the harbor room was not designed to accommodate. Police belonged outside, on the streets below the restaurant's glass and steel, not in the carefully curated world where problems were typically handled with private apologies and discreet refunds. A man in a dark suit appeared at the edge of the scene, moving fast but wearing a face trained for calm. He was the floor manager, and the strain around his mouth betrayed him before he spoke. "Ladies," he began, voice low, palms out. "Let's take a breath. We don't want to disrupt other guests." Maya looked up at him, and something tightened in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. She knew this script. She had seen it in hospital corridors when patients were ignored, in conference rooms when women were interrupted and told to stay professional, in every place where the priority was not justice, but comfort. "Your guest assaulted me," Maya said. "I need the general manager. I need security. And I need confirmation that you're preserving your camera footage." The floor manager's eyes flicked, just once, to Vivian. It was the smallest movement, almost invisible, but it was loaded. He was deciding who mattered. Vivian seized the moment with practiced ease. "I was threatened," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound victimized. She became aggressive. "I felt unsafe." Maya's jaw tightened. She did not argue the lie with emotion. She countered it with structure. "I have been seated. I have not stood. I have not touched her. She approached my table," Maya said, turning slightly so her words carried beyond the immediate circle. "I'm requesting your incident report process now." The manager swallowed. "Perhaps," he offered, glancing around the room, "we could move you to a quieter section while we sort this out." Move you. Not remove the person who struck her. Not address Vivian's raised hand, her shouting, the witnesses staring in disbelief. Move the woman who had been hit. The suggestion landed like a second slap. Colder, quieter, almost worse. Maya's fingers curled around the edge of the tablecloth. For a moment, she felt something old stir in her chest. The familiar pressure to comply, to make things easier for everyone else, to swallow pain so the room could go back to pretending. Then she exhaled and let that instinct die. "No," she said, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly, as if she were stating a fact. "I'm not moving. I did nothing wrong. She did." Vivian's face tightened with fury at being contradicted. Unbelievable, she hissed. This is exactly what I mean. Entitled. Disrespectful. The manager's eyes flicked again, trapped between ethics and influence. Maya watched him struggle, watched him reach for the safest option for the restaurant, not the right one for the person bleeding quietly at the table. In that moment, Maya understood something with brutal clarity. The harbor room wasn't failing because it didn't know what to do. It was failing because doing the right thing would cost someone important their comfort. And the room was still deciding which comfort mattered more. Pain arrived a half-second after sound. It bloomed across Maya Jefferson's cheek in a hot, spreading wave, sharp enough to steal her breath, and precise enough to feel deliberate. Not chaotic, not accidental. The kind of pain delivered by someone who expected obedience and met resistance instead. For a moment, Maya's vision narrowed. The room seemed to tilt, edges blurring, as her body caught up to what her mind already understood. Something irreversible had just happened. She did not scream. She did not stand. She lifted her hands slowly, as if moving through water, and pressed her fingertips to her cheek. The skin was already swelling beneath her touch. Warm, tender, real. Across from her, Vivian Sterling stood rigid, chest rising and falling too fast, eyes bright with a satisfaction she hadn't expected anyone to see. Her hand lingered in the air for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, long enough for witnesses to register the truth before she lowered it. The harbor room exhaled all at once. A collective intake of breath rippled through the space, followed by a silence so complete it felt staged. Silverware lay untouched. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the water beyond the window seemed to hold still, dark and watchful. Then the whispers began. Oh my God. Did she really? That was a slap. I think she hit her. Maya heard them all, filtered through the ringing in her ears. She tasted blood where her lip had split, metallic and bitter. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with a fierce, grounding clarity. This is real, she told herself. Stay present. She looked up at Vivian, her gaze steady. You hit me, Maya said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. In the silence, it sounded almost ceremonial. A naming of facts, a refusal to let reality be rewritten. Vivian's expression shifted instantly. The satisfaction vanished, replaced by practiced indignation. I defended myself, she snapped. You were aggressive. The lie was immediate, reflexive, spoken with the confidence of someone who had said similar things before and watched them stick. Maya didn't respond right away. She reached for her phone, the one already recording on the table, and turned it so the screen faced her. The red dot glowed softly. I asked you to step away, she said. You refused. Then you struck me. Do not speak to me again. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the phone back down, but her posture remained upright, anchored. A chair scraped loudly nearby. I saw it, a woman's voice said, firm and unshaking. Heads turned. A silver-haired woman in her 60s stood beside her table, napkins still folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed on Vivian with unmistakable authority. I saw the entire interaction, she continued. You approached her. She remained seated. You struck her. There was no threat. The floor manager flinched, as if the words had physical weight. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. That's not what happened, Vivian said quickly, turning toward the room now, addressing an invisible jury. She was hostile. She raised her voice. I felt unsafe. Unsafe. The word landed wrong. Too neat. Too rehearsed. Maya felt a surge of anger then. Not explosive, but focused. The kind that sharpens thought instead of blurring it. She turned slightly, angling her body so the witnesses, the staff, and the cameras would all catch her profile. The mark on her cheek was no longer subtle. It stood out starkly against her skin, a visible contradiction to Vivian's story. I am calling the police, Maya said calmly. The manager's head snapped up. Ma'am, perhaps we can resolve this internally. No, Maya interrupted. Not loudly, not rudely. You can't, the word echoed. a boundary drawn with finality. She tapped her phone and placed it back into her bag. I've documented the incident. There are witnesses. Your cameras are recording. This is no longer a misunderstanding. Vivian's composure cracked. You can't be serious, she hissed, her voice dropping. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Maya met her gaze, unwavering. Yes, she said. I'm refusing to disappear to make this easier for you. The manager looked around the room, at the faces now openly watching, at the phones no longer hidden. He realized, too late, that control had slipped from his hands. Somewhere near the entrance, a man stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't shouting. He was walking straight toward Maya's table. And when he spoke, his voice cut cleanly through the chaos that was only just beginning. Has anyone called the police yet? Maya turned. Ethan Reed stood there, eyes locked not on Vivian, but on her face, on the mark she hadn't yet had time to fully feel. And in that moment, before explanations, before consequences, before the world decided how this story would be told, Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. The slap had been loud, but the aftermath was going to be deafening. The question, has anyone called the police yet, did not come with anger. It came with certainty. Ethan Reed stood beside Maya's table, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, steady in grounding. He did not touch her at first. He didn't need to. His eyes moved from her cheek to the floor manager, then to Vivian, and finally to the room itself, taking inventory the way he did when something had gone wrong and truth needed structure. I'm asking as a procedural matter, Ethan said, not a threat. The floor manager cleared his throat. Sir, we were just trying to de-escalate. By relocating the person who was struck? Ethan interrupted, still calm. Or by documenting the assault? The word assault hung in the air like a flare. Vivian laughed, sharp and brittle. This is absurd. She provoked me. Anyone here could tell you that. I can, said the silver-haired woman again, stepping forward with the quiet authority of someone used to courtrooms and consequences. And so can my husband. And the couple at table 12, heads nodded, chairs shifted, the room changed shape. The woman turned to the manager. Preserve your footage immediately. Dining room cameras, corridor cameras. Timestamp approximately 8:42. The manager blinked. Ma'am, are you? I'm a retired federal prosecutor, she said, not unkindly. And you are about to decide whether your establishment becomes a footnote in a criminal case or a witness to one. That did it. A staff member moved toward the security desk. Another pulled out a tablet. The soft machinery of accountability, long delayed, finally began to hum. Vivian's smile faltered. She took a step back, as if the floor itself had shifted beneath her heels. This is being blown out of proportion, she said quickly. I barely touched her, and she was recording me without consent. Maya spoke before Ethan could. Her voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it now. I began recording after you refused to step away from my table, she said. I announced it out loud. You continued. That audio documents harassment and assault. Vivian turned to Ethan, searching his face for something. Solidarity, recognition, leverage. What she found instead was distance. Who are you? Vivian demanded, her voice rising. You don't know what she did. Ethan finally placed his hand on Maya's shoulder, light and deliberate. The contact sent a quiet message through the room. This is not a misunderstanding. I know exactly what she did, he said. She asked you to leave her alone. You didn't. She asked for a manager. You escalated. Then you struck her. Vivian's eyes flicked to Maya's cheek again, and something in her expression shifted. Not remorse, not yet, but calculation. The room was no longer on her side. That was new, dangerous. You're all acting like you know her, Vivian snapped. You don't. You don't know who she really is. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Who she is isn't on trial. Vivian scoffed. Of course it is. People like her don't just end up in places like this without an angle. The word people landed with a thud. The retired prosecutor inhaled sharply. A server froze mid-step. Someone near the bar muttered, "Jesus." Maya felt the familiar heat rise in her chest. Not panic, not shame, but anger refined by years of restraint. She looked directly at Vivian. "You don't get to rewrite reality because you're uncomfortable with it," Maya said. "And you don't get to decide who belongs based on how they look." Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught. For the first time since she'd approached the table, her certainty wavered. She glanced around the room and realized something she hadn't anticipated. No one was nodding along. No one was rescuing her narrative. The quiet, once protective, had turned hostile. A uniformed security officer appeared near the entrance, speaking into a radio. The manager nodded quickly, his face pale. Vivian's hand tightened around the strap of her purse. "This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier force. "We can settle this privately." Ethan shook his head once. "No," he said, "we can't." Vivian's eyes met his then, searching for dominance, for hierarchy, for the familiar comfort of being recognized as someone who mattered. What she saw instead was resolve. And in that moment, small, sharp, unmistakable, the mask slipped. Not completely, but enough for everyone in the harbor room to see the first crack. Vivian Sterling had survived a lifetime on one simple rule: control the story before anyone else could. She'd done it in boardrooms where reputations were traded like currency, in charity committees where smiles concealed knives, in private dinners where a single rumor could decide a career. If something went wrong, you didn't apologize, you reframed. You didn't admit, you suggested. You didn't lose, you redirected. So when Ethan Reed appeared beside Maya's table, Vivian's instincts immediately reached for the familiar script. He was a white man in a tailored coat, calm in the way powerful men tended to be calm. He looked like the kind of person the harbor room existed to serve. He looked in Vivian's mind like an ally she could recruit. "Thank God," she said, seizing the moment as if it belonged to her. She turned toward him with practiced urgency, voice pitched to be heard by the right people. "Sir, you need to speak to them. This woman has been causing a disturbance. She refused to cooperate, and when I tried to help, she became aggressive." She gestured toward Maya as if pointing out a stain on fine linen. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't look away. But Ethan's gaze never went to Vivian's accusing finger. It stayed on Maya's face, on the swelling mark that was now unmistakably visible beneath the soft restaurant lighting. For a beat, Ethan was very still. Then he turned, not toward Vivian, but toward the manager. "Where are your cameras monitored?" he asked quietly. The manager swallowed. "In the security office. We've instructed staff to preserve." "Good," Ethan said. "And the police?" "They're on their way," the manager replied quickly, as if desperate to prove competence. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself, as though checking boxes on an internal list. Vivian's expression flickered. The script wasn't landing. She tried again, sharper this time. "You're not understanding," Vivian insisted. "She was recording me. She was threatening to ruin my evening. I have rights." Ethan finally looked at her. The room seemed to contract around that glance. His eyes were green, clear, and unnervingly steady. Not angry exactly, something colder, something that didn't need to raise its voice to be dangerous. "What's your name?" he asked. Vivian blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your name," Ethan repeated, calm as glass. "Vivian Sterling," she said, lifting her chin automatically. "And you?" Ethan didn't answer the question. He turned slightly, positioning himself so his body was between Vivian and Maya, not aggressively but unmistakably. The gesture was subtle, protective, final. Then he spoke, and this time he used words that could not be negotiated. "You assaulted Dr. Maya Jefferson," he said. The title landed like a blow. A ripple moved through the room. People who had been watching silently now leaned in, faces sharpening with recognition of something important shifting. A few diners glanced down at their phones, thumbs moving fast, searching, confirming, connecting dots. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. "Doctor?" she repeated, as if the syllables didn't make sense. It doesn't matter," Ethan cut in. "But since you seem to care about labels, let's be clear. That's Dr. Jefferson, and she is my fiancé." The word fiancé changed everything. Vivian's eyes snapped back to Maya, scanning her with renewed panic, as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a person, Vivian had never truly seen that, but as a problem with consequences. Maya felt her stomach tighten, not because she needed Ethan to validate her, but because she understood what this reveal did to people like Vivian. It stripped away the only justification they ever believed in, that harm was acceptable when the victim was nobody. Across the room, a man whispered, loud enough to carry, "Ethan Reed. That's him." Another voice followed, hushed and disbelieving. "Reed? Sentinel Arc? The cybersecurity guy?" A phone screen lit up brightly at the bar, displaying Ethan's face next to a headline. Someone else's camera shifted angle, trying to frame Maya and Ethan in the same shot. Vivian heard it. She heard all of it. The recognition, the confirmation, the way the room began to resort itself around a new hierarchy, one that no longer favored her. Her skin went pale beneath her makeup. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but the words didn't come out clean. The only thing she could summon was the most disastrous defense possible, the one that revealed her entire worldview in a single sentence. Vivian stammered, voice cracking. "I didn't know who she was." The silence that followed was immediate and brutal. Ethan's gaze did not soften. If anything, it sharpened, because now Vivian had done the one thing that made forgiveness impossible. She had told the truth without realizing it. "You didn't know," Ethan repeated quietly. Vivian nodded quickly, desperate. "She didn't look, how was I supposed to?" Ethan took a slow step forward, and in that moment, Vivian Sterling realized she had misjudged more than Maya Jefferson. She had misjudged the kind of power Ethan Reed carried. Not the power to buy silence, the power to refuse it. "I didn't know who she was." Vivian Sterling's words hovered in the air long after she spoke them, fragile and damning all at once. She seemed to realize, a heartbeat too late, that she had said the quiet part out loud, that she had offered not an excuse, but a confession. Maya Jefferson felt the room lean inward. Not physically, no one moved, but in attention, in judgment, in the subtle recalibration that happens when a crowd realizes it has just witnessed a truth it can't unsee. Ethan Reed didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He simply looked at Vivian with a stillness that made her unease visible. "You didn't know," he repeated. "And that's your defense." Vivian swallowed. "I'm saying there was a misunderstanding. If I had known she was—" "Stop," Maya said. The single word cut cleanly through the space between them. Everyone turned to her. Maya rose from her chair slowly. Her cheeks still burned, the swelling now undeniable, but she stood with a steadiness that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with resolve. She did not step toward Vivian. She did not step toward Ethan. She stepped into the space between stories, between what had happened and what people were already trying to turn it into. "You don't need to know who I am to treat me with basic respect," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but it carried, shaped by years of classrooms, hearings, and rooms where speaking softly meant being ignored. This was not softness. This was control. "I didn't ask you to recognize me," she continued, eyes fixed on Vivian. "I asked you to leave me alone. I asked you to respect my space. You refused. And then you hit me." Vivian opened her mouth, but Maya didn't let her interrupt. "And now," Maya went on, turning slightly so the room could hear her too, "you're telling yourself, and everyone else, that the real mistake wasn't what you did. It was that you did it to the wrong person." A murmur moved through the restaurant. Not whispers now, but something closer to discomfort, recognition. The retired prosecutor nodded once, solemn. A server's eyes dropped to the floor. Somewhere near the bar, someone exhaled sharply, as if the words had landed too close to home. Maya gestured gently toward Ethan, not to elevate him, but to remove him from the equation. "Who I'm engaged to doesn't matter," she said. "What I do for a living doesn't matter. How much money I have or don't have doesn't matter." She paused, letting the silence do its work. "What matters," she said, "is that you decided I didn't belong before I ever spoke. And when I didn't disappear the way you expected me to, you chose violence." Vivian shook her head weakly. "That's not fair. I was trying to maintain standards. You don't understand the pressure." "No," Maya said. "You don't understand the damage." Her gaze swept the room now, including the onlookers who had stayed silent, the ones who had hesitated, the ones who had only found their voices after power shifted sides. "This doesn't just happen to people with titles or partners who can intervene," Maya said. "It happens to people who don't have witnesses willing to speak up. It happens to people who get moved to another table, escorted out quietly, told to stop making a scene." She touched her cheek, not in pain this time, but in emphasis. "It happens because too many people think respect is something you earn by looking right, sounding right, knowing the right names. It's not." Ethan watched her, something tight in his chest loosening even as something else, pride, awe, settled in its place. This was the woman he loved, not because she was unbreakable, but because she refused to let broken systems define her worth. Vivian's shoulders sagged. The confidence that had once armored her was gone now, stripped away by the weight of a room that no longer belonged to her. "I made a mistake," Vivian whispered. Maya met her eyes one last time. "Yes," she said, "you did." Then she turned, not away in retreat, but forward, toward a truth that had finally been spoken aloud. "You don't need to know someone," Maya said, her voice steady as the harbor outside, "to respect them." And in the quiet that followed, the lesson settled in. Uncomfortable, undeniable, and impossible to forget. Vivian Sterling did not wake up that morning intending to hurt anyone. That was the lie she had told herself for years. And like most lies that survive long enough, it had hardened into something that felt like truth. In Vivian's mind, she was not cruel, she was corrective. Not prejudiced, just discerning. Not violent, simply unwilling to be disrespected. The problem was that her entire sense of order depended on people like Maya Jefferson knowing their place without being told. Vivian had grown up learning that the world was fragile, and that status was the only thing holding it together. Her father had built a regional real estate empire from nothing, clawing his way into rooms where he was never invited twice. Vivian watched him transform himself. New suits, new speech, new rules, until the man she knew became someone the city respected. From him, she learned a single, unforgiving lesson. Belonging was conditional. You were safe only as long as you fit the picture. By her 40s, Vivian had perfected that picture. She chaired galas, sat on nonprofit boards, smiled for photos beside plaques engraved with her family name. She spoke about community while quietly guarding the gates that kept it exclusive. To the outside world, she was polished, generous, indispensable. But beneath the polish, the ground had been shifted. For months, Vivian's position had been weakening. A new generation of donors was emerging, younger, data-driven, impatient with performative charity. The board she had assumed would elect her chairwoman next quarter had begun whispering about fresh leadership. Someone with credibility, someone who looked different from the old guard. Someone like Maya Jefferson. Vivian hadn't known Maya's name when she first noticed her across the harbor room, but she had recognized the threat instantly. A black woman, sitting alone, unbothered by the room's silent hierarchy, not asking permission, not signaling gratitude, not trying to be palatable. That kind of presence unsettled Vivian more than open defiance ever could, because it reminded her of something she'd spent her life trying to outrun. The fear that status was not permanent, that the rules could change, that the doors she guarded so fiercely might one day open without her consent. When Vivian approached Maya's table, she told herself she was enforcing standards, maintaining order, protecting the atmosphere. But beneath those justifications was a simpler, uglier truth. Maya had not bowed. She had not scrambled to explain herself. She had not apologized for taking up space. And in Vivian's world, that was unforgivable. Every calm refusal from Maya felt like a challenge. Every measured sentence felt like defiance. And when Maya asked for the manager, when she invoked procedure instead of submission, something in Vivian snapped. It wasn't rage, it was panic. Panic that the hierarchy she relied on no longer worked. Panic that the unspoken rules were being exposed as arbitrary. Panic that if someone like Maya could sit there, quiet, confident, unmoved, then Vivian's authority was nothing more than an illusion propped up by fear and compliance. The slap was not about anger. It was about restoration, a desperate, instinctive attempt to put the world back in its proper shape. But violence has a way of revealing what words conceal. As Vivian stood now, surrounded by witnesses, cameras, and consequences she could no longer manage, she felt the truth press in from all sides. She had not lost control because Maya was powerful. She had lost control because Maya wasn't afraid. And that terrified her more than anything else ever had. Vivian Sterling understood something most people never admitted out loud. When power is slipping, truth no longer matters. Only damage does. She felt it in the way the room had turned against her. How the silence was no longer protective but judgmental. How the faces she once relied on for quiet agreement now avoided her eyes. The hierarchy had shifted, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. So Vivian did what people like her always did when exposed. She changed the target. Her gaze slid past Maya and locked onto Ethan. And for the first time since the confrontation began, her voice softened, not with remorse, but with calculated concern. "You seem like a reasonable man," Vivian said, shaking her head slowly, as if disappointed on his behalf. "I don't think you realize what's actually happening here." Ethan didn't respond. He stood beside Maya, his presence steady, protective without being possessive. That steadiness irritated Vivian more than anger ever could. "She's very good," Vivian continued, gesturing vaguely toward Maya without looking at her. "I'll give her that. Intelligent, composed, exactly the kind of woman men like you fall for." Maya felt the words before she understood them, a chill sliding between her ribs. "Vivian," the retired prosecutor warned quietly, but Vivian ignored her. "I've seen this before," Vivian said, her tone almost conversational now. "The humility, the refusal to spend money, the way she makes you feel like you're different from other wealthy men. Safer, needed." Maya's jaw tightened. She could feel the room tensing again, drawn unwillingly into a new, more intimate kind of violence. Vivian leaned in, just slightly, her eyes never leaving Ethan. "You think she loves you for who you are, but what she really loves is what you represent." "That's enough," Ethan said sharply. Vivian smiled, thin and triumphant. "Is it? Or are you afraid I'm right?" Maya turned to Ethan then, searching his face not for doubt, but for pain. And she saw it, not suspicion, not betrayal, but something quieter and more dangerous. Recognition. Not recognition of Vivian's words as truth, but recognition of how easily the world weaponized them. Vivian seized on the pause. "Come on," she pressed. "A woman like her doesn't just end up with a man like you by accident. She knew exactly where to be, what to say, how to look harmless." Maya felt something inside her crack, not because she believed it, but because she had spent years preparing for this exact accusation. Years knowing that no matter how much she accomplished, how carefully she lived, someone would eventually reduce her entire life to a strategy. Ethan shook his head. "You don't know her." "Oh, I know the type," Vivian shot back. "The ones who play the long game, who build a story so convincing even they start to believe it." Maya inhaled slowly. She felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the night and everything to do with accumulation. The weight of always being exceptional just to be tolerated, of always being grateful for love that others were allowed to take for granted. She stepped forward, away from Ethan's protective shoulder. "Stop," she said quietly. Vivian's eyes flickered with surprise. You don't want to hear the rest? I've heard it my whole life, Maya replied. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried something raw now. That I'm too ambitious, too polished, too careful. That if I succeed, it must be because I planned it. She looked at Ethan, then back at Vivian. You think I'm using him because you can't imagine a world where someone like me is simply chosen. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed again. Maya turned fully toward Ethan. This is what she's trying to do, she said softly. She's trying to poison something she can't control. Ethan reached for Maya's hand, but she didn't take it. Not yet. Not because she didn't want him, but because she needed to stand on her own for what came next. Vivian saw the hesitation and mistook it for victory. There it is, she said, almost gleeful. That doubt. You feel it, don't you? Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. No, but Maya felt the truth settle deeper. The poison wasn't in whether Ethan believed Vivian. The poison was in knowing that people like Vivian would never stop trying to convince the world, and her, that love across lines of power was always a transaction. And suddenly, the slap no longer felt like the worst thing that had happened that night. This was. Maya Jefferson had always been good at containment. She could hold grief behind a steady voice. She could swallow anger and reframe it into strategy. She could walk into rooms that didn't want her and make herself useful enough that they had to keep her anyway. She had learned those skills the way some people learn prayer, early, often, and out of necessity. But containment has a cost. Standing there under the harbor room's chandeliers, cheek burning, heart pounding, Maya felt the cost finally come due. Vivian's words kept echoing, not because they carried truth, but because they were designed like a blade, thin, sharp, aimed at the softest part of her. They weren't trying to convince Ethan of anything. They were trying to remind Maya of an old fear she carried like a second spine. That no matter how real her love was, the world would always treat it like a scheme. Maya looked around the room and saw faces watching her the way people watched fires, hungry for meaning, for entertainment, for a moral they could repeat later as if it belonged to them. Some looked sympathetic, some looked horrified, and a few, only a few but enough, looked curious in a way that felt like suspicion. Vivian had counted on those faces. Maya's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words caught, stuck somewhere between rage and exhaustion. She felt tears rise, hot and humiliating, and she hated them, not because crying was weakness, but because she refused to give Vivian another spectacle to feed on. Ethan stepped closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Maya, he murmured, voice low and careful. Look at me. The tenderness in his tone should have steadied her. Instead, it broke something open. Because tenderness, in moments like this, reminded her of everything she was tired of carrying alone. I can't do this, Maya whispered. The sentence was small, almost swallowed by the room's hush, but Ethan heard it. He stiffened. What do you mean? He asked, alarm flashing across his features. Maya shook her head slowly. Not this, she said, gesturing vaguely toward Vivian. The witnesses, the phones. Not always this. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that too. The involuntary honesty of it, the way it slipped out before she could polish it into something less vulnerable. I'm tired, she said, louder now, not as an accusation, but as a confession. I'm tired of being the lesson, the symbol, the exception. Ethan's brow furrowed, pain tightening his mouth. You don't have to be anything, he said. Not for them. Maya laughed once, sharp and bitter, surprising even herself. Don't I? She turned, letting her gaze sweep the room again. Look at them, Ethan. Look at how they're watching. Her eyes flicked to the phones, to the nervous smiles, to the people pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Half of them are waiting for me to be perfect. The other half are waiting for me to slip. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to deny it, but the truth was visible in the room's posture, in its hunger. Maya swallowed hard. And I'm tired of needing to be bulletproof just to be loved in public. The words landed like a weight. Ethan flinched, as if struck. Maya, no, she said softly, holding up a hand. Not to stop him from caring, but to stop him from fixing. Let me finish. She faced him fully now. The world around them blurred, the harbor room fading into background noise, as if the only real thing left was the space between their eyes. You asked me earlier if I wanted to wear something different, Maya said. Her voice stayed calm, but every syllable carried years of restraint. You said it wasn't about fitting in. You said it was about people looking for excuses. Ethan's expression tightened with regret. I was trying to protect you. I know, Maya whispered, and that's what hurts. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Because when you say, I need armor, Maya continued, even with love, it still means the world gets to be cruel, and the burden is still on me to survive it. Silence wrapped around them, thick and intimate. Even Vivian seemed to hold her breath, sensing she had found a deeper wound than a slap could ever reach. Ethan's voice came out raw. I'm sorry, he said. I don't want you to be sorry, Maya said, wiping a tear before it could fall. She straightened her shoulders, as if physically reclaiming space inside her own body. I want you to understand. I want you to see what it costs. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes glassy with something that looked like shame and love tangled together. I see it, he said, and I hate it. Maya took a breath, deep, steady. Then she turned back toward Vivian. For a moment, the room expected collapse, expected Maya to retreat, to crumble, to confirm the poison Vivian had tried to pour into her life. Instead, Maya's voice emerged clearer than before. You wanted to break me, she said quietly. You wanted to make me disappear. She stepped forward, not toward Vivian's body, but toward Vivian's power. It won't work, Maya said, because I'm done performing strength for your comfort. I'm allowed to feel hurt. I'm allowed to be exhausted. And I'm still here. The last words rang out like a vow. Maya Jefferson had broken, yes, but what broke wasn't her. It was the illusion that she had to keep shrinking to survive. For a long moment after Maya spoke, the harbor room was no longer a restaurant. It was a held breath. The chandeliers glowed softly overhead, indifferent and beautiful. The harbor lights blinked beyond the glass like distant witnesses. But inside, time felt suspended, every table quiet, every face caught between discomfort and awe, as if the room had been forced to remember what it meant to be human. Maya stood with her shoulders squared, cheeks still flushed, eyes bright with unshed tears. She had said what she needed to say, not to win, not to impress, to survive without surrendering. Ethan stared at her as if seeing her again for the first time, not because he didn't know her, but because he was watching her choose herself in public, without armor. It was the kind of courage that couldn't be faked, couldn't be bought, couldn't be performed. And it frightened him, not because it was fragile, but because he understood what it cost her to offer it. He stepped closer, slowly, as if asking permission without words. Maya, who said, voice low enough that it felt private despite the room, I need you to hear me. Her gaze lifted to his. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan continued. Not because I can protect you from people like her, his eyes flicked briefly to Vivian, but because I refuse to build a life where the person I love has to shrink to make it livable. Maya's throat tightened. She'd heard promises before. Pretty ones, easy ones, promises that existed only when things were calm. This was different. This was being said while the world watched, while the consequences were still unfolding, while it would have been easier for his reputation, for his company, for his comfort, to keep his love quiet and controlled. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. The motion was subtle, but the room reacted anyway. A faint collective inhale, a ripple of attention shifting, phones tilting, eyes widening. Maya's breath caught. Ethan, she whispered, almost warning him, not because she didn't want it, because she didn't want a spectacle made of something sacred. He shook his head once, gently. Not for them, he murmured. For us. He didn't kneel. He didn't perform. He simply opened the box between them, revealing the ring she had already said yes to months ago. A simple band, understated, chosen together. I asked you to marry me because I want a world with you in it, he said, voice steady. Not a world you have to prove yourself to. Maya's eyes stung. Tears threatened again. But this time they were different. Less humiliation, more release. The kind that came when someone finally named the truth you'd been carrying alone. Ethan kept his voice calm, but something fierce lived beneath it. So here's what I'm choosing, he said. I'm choosing to stop managing other people's comfort. I'm choosing to stop asking you to armor up so they can stay ugly in peace. He looked at her, fully, as if the room didn't exist. I'm choosing you, he said, exactly as you are, not as a version that makes this easier. Maya held his gaze, and in it she saw no doubt, only fear of losing her, only love that refused to negotiate. For a heartbeat, she felt the old instinct rise, to make it simpler, quieter, safer. To take the moment and tuck it away where it couldn't be judged. Then she remembered what she'd said to Vivian. I'm still here, Maya exhaled slowly. I choose us too, she said, voice soft but clear. A sound moved through the restaurant, relief almost. Not applause yet, not celebration, just a collective recognition that something real had happened in front of them. Something deeper than gossip. Ethan's shoulders sagged, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. He reached for her hand, and this time Maya let him take it. Their fingers interlaced, warm and steady. Across from them, Vivian Sterling stood frozen, her face tight with disbelief. Her plan had been simple. Hit, humiliate, rewrite, and then poison. She had expected Maya to retreat, expected Ethan to be rattled, expected love to fracture under public pressure the way so many things did. Instead, she had given them a crucible, and they had come out stronger. Vivian's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. The room's attention no longer belonged to her. Maya looked down at her joined hand with Ethan's and felt something settle inside her bones. A quiet, unshakable decision. Then she lifted her head and said, calmly, as if closing a door, we're staying. The words weren't defiance for an audience. They were a vow, a private vow made in public, where no one could pretend it didn't matter. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They come in layers, quiet at first, almost polite, before they gather weight and become impossible to outrun. The first arrive with the sound of sirens, faint but unmistakable, drifting up from the street below the harbor room. The music had long since stopped. No one asked for checks. No one pretended the night could still be salvaged. Two uniformed officers entered with practiced calm, guided by the floor manager whose hands now trembled despite his effort to appear composed. Their eyes went first to Maya's face, then to Vivian Sterling, and finally to the witnesses who had already stepped forward without being asked. What happened here? One of the officers asked. Maya answered without embellishment. She stated the facts the way she stated data, clearly, chronologically, without emotion that could be misread. She identified witnesses. She referenced the audio recording. She pointed to the cameras. The officer nodded, listening, writing. Vivian tried once more. This is a misunderstanding, she said, her voice strained. This doesn't need to become a spectacle. The officer met her gaze, unmoved. Ma'am, he said evenly, you struck her. That makes it a matter for the report. The word report landed harder than any accusation. Reports became records. Records became patterns. Security escorted Vivian a few steps away as statements were taken. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her hand. Texts from friends, from her assistant, from someone whose name flashed across the screen and made her face pale. Board member, major donor, legal counsel. The room was no longer neutral ground. Across the dining room, whispers had turned strategic. Not gossip, calculation. People weren't asking what happened anymore. They were asking who else was there, who saw, who recorded, who would speak. By the time the officers finished, a short video, barely 10 seconds, shaky but clear, had already surfaced online. Not the slap, the aftermath. Vivian's voice saying, "I didn't know who she was." It spread faster than outrage ever did, because it needed no explanation. Outside, cameras waited. Ethan stood with Maya near the window, his hand resting lightly at her back. He wasn't shielding her from view. He was anchoring her, reminding her that she didn't stand alone. "I'm going to let my legal team handle communication," he said quietly. "You don't have to respond to anything tonight." Maya nodded. She trusted that, not because he was powerful, but because he understood restraint. Power used carefully, responsibly. Vivian was escorted past them on her way out. For a moment she stopped, eyes flicking between Maya and Ethan, searching for mercy. "I can fix this," she said hoarsely. "We can fix this." Ethan's voice was calm, final. "No," he said. "You can't." That was the social consequence. The financial ones followed faster than Vivian expected. By morning, her name was gone from the nonprofit's website. By afternoon, a scheduled announcement of her board appointment was quietly postponed, then erased. Donors released statements about values and alignment. Meetings were canceled. Invitations evaporated. And then came the call that broke what remained of her certainty. Her husband's firm, already stretched thin, lost a major partnership. Not publicly, not dramatically, just a short email citing reputational risk and compliance review. The numbers didn't lie. By the end of the week, the assault charge stood. The restaurant released footage to investigators. Witness statements were filed. The Harbor Room issued a public apology and announced mandatory protocol changes. Training, escalation procedures, a zero-tolerance policy stated in words that could no longer hide behind elegance. Vivian Sterling became a cautionary headline. Maya Jefferson became something else entirely. Not a victim, not a symbol. A woman who refused to disappear when disappearance would have been easier. That night, long after the police left and the cameras moved on, Maya and Ethan finally sat down at their table again. The food was cold, the wine untouched. Maya picked up her fork. "Let's eat," she said quietly. Ethan smiled, small, proud, unshaken. Outside, the harbor rolled on, indifferent to status and scandal alike. Inside, the consequences continued to unfold. And this time, they made sense. 3 months later, the story no longer belonged to the Harbor Room. It lived everywhere else. Vivian Sterling's case moved quietly through the system. No dramatic perp walk, no screaming headlines, but the outcome was unmistakable. A guilty plea, court-mandated anger management, community service that placed her, weakly and unglamorous, in spaces she had once dismissed as invisible. The charity boards never called again. Her name faded from invitations, from donor lists, from the careful circles where she had once ruled by proximity alone. Power, it turned out, did not forgive exposure. The backlash didn't stop with her. Maya Jefferson's inbox filled overnight, some messages vicious, others desperate, many painfully familiar. Women wrote to her from airports, restaurants, hospitals, conferences. Different cities, same story. "It happened to me too." Maya read every message. She answered some, she archived others. And with each one, something shifted. The night that had begun with a slap became a line in the sand. Maya worked with her legal team and community partners to launch a public-facing initiative. Clear reporting protocols, bystander education, institutional accountability, not slogans, systems. Ethan stood beside her, not in front. He used his resources to fund the work, then stepped back, insisting it remain led by the people most affected. For the first time, Maya felt what real partnership looked like. Not protection, but alignment. They returned to Seattle months later, not to the Harbor Room, but to a small restaurant overlooking the same water. No chandeliers, no velvet hush, just good food, and an easy view of the bay. Maya caught her reflection in the window and smiled. She looked the same and completely different. The world hadn't become kinder overnight, but it had become louder, more watchful, less willing to look away. And Maya knew this now, with a certainty no one could take from her. Belonging was never something she had to earn. It was something she had always carried. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt judged, silenced, or made to shrink, share it. Leave a comment. Follow for more stories about power, dignity, and what happens when people refuse to disappear. Because stories like this matter most when they're told together.